This is a live edition of an event that I've been doing all over the state, quite honestly. But we're talking about what happened in this election this past week or last week, obviously. What those results were and what's it going to mean for us as Texans going forward. We're going to look into some of the stuff that the Trump administration is already talking about implementing and kind of see how that's going to affect us here in the state. There's no shortage of it. You know that. We are Texas after all. But first, I want to kind of, set the stage here. First, a big thank you to everybody who's out there online who is joining this. I know this is, taking time out of your day, and this is a big deal to me, especially to you Texas Take, newsletter readers. I really appreciate all your opens on that. Every time you guys open that newsletter, it's like an angel gets its wings or something like that. I'm not entirely sure if that's true, but and also I want to thank the Houston Chronicle and the Express News for setting us up here, and we are in the San Antonio Express offices now doing this event live, and so I want to give a thanks to all of them, and of course Jennifer Chang, my colleague, really kind of helped set up a lot of this stuff, and we wouldn't be here if it weren't for her ability to organize a very disorganized reporter during a political campaign season. Finally, I'm not doing this by myself, as you probably noticed. Laura Barberena is working with me here today. She's going to be really helping me out a bunch, particularly on Bexar County. She has a PhD from the University of Texas and is a communications consultant and researcher specializing in political communication and civic engagement. She is also the founder and owner of Viva Politics. That's a big deal here. It's located here in San Antonio. The firm manages political campaigns as well as produces political mail. We're going to get into that a little bit about what mail works and what doesn't. Radio spots, television commercials, and other campaign materials. She knows a lot of the on the ground stuff. So that's going to really help us out a lot as we kind of get through this and help kind of get us into some of the background of, how we got here, what happened on election day and where we're going to go.
Yeah,
and
so
of course,
thank you for inviting me.
No,
I think we're all kind of scratching our heads, and I'm obviously a Democratic consultant, so licking a few wounds here. But I'm telling folks, it's not a tattoo; it's just a bruise. So we're gonna be okay. So that's kind of my take on this.
Well, and of course, I should introduce myself, right? I'm Jeremy Wallace. I'm the senior political reporter for the Houston Chronicle and the Express News. You likely have, hopefully heard me on the Texas Take podcast with Scott Braddock. We do that every week. There'll be another edition coming out later on this week as well. You also, like I mentioned earlier, I have the Texas Take newsletter that comes out every day. Hopefully, y'all are getting that and taking a look at that each day. Has all the good political news in there. It keeps you up to date on everything that's happening in the state of Texas and in Washington, impacting us. But with that out of the way, let's just kind of get into this. There's a lot to unpack in this election. It's like there's a lot of things we expected to happen, and I think a lot of people who are joining us today are probably a little surprised at some of the results, right? Maybe you had a feeling things were going to go one way or the other, but first I want to kind of start with what has kind of set this all up? How did we get here in the first place? And one of the things I think about elections, like with a lot of things, it's all about perspective, where you stand on things. And I thought about, this is a crazy thought, but I thought about this in a very Star Wars kind of way. If you're a Star Wars geek, follow along here. For the Democrats, this is kind of like they had the New Hope movie, like the first one out. It's like this excitement, they're making gains. It looks like this is going to be their time. Well, Empire Strikes Back hit. Not only did they lose all kinds of stuff, Luke has lost his hand. Their hero is in carbonate, somewhere, and Jabba's lounge somewhere, and they're gone, right?
Yeah.
Now, on the Republican side, y'all in a Star Wars movie too. Assuming y'all are the rebels in my version, you're in Return of the Jedi already, right? You've survived. Your hero is back from the carbonate and you're ready to go. It's like now you're back in control. It's like, and I think that's kind of the basic framework with what we have here today. And let me take a quick step back on that. And why that is, I want to go back to a story I wrote a couple weeks ago about where we are with voter registration. This is a major success story in Texas and has changed the fundamentals of politics in the state of Texas. No matter what you think of the results from last week, this state is not what it was. If you go back to, from 2000 to 2012, the voter registration in the state was flat.
Right.
We were a non-voting state. We had we had the people, the population was growing, but in that 10-year period or 12-year period, we had 12 million registered voters, and we ended that decade with 12 million registered voters.
Yeah.
We just didn't go anywhere.
Right.
But something happened starting in 2014. That is when we start seeing this dramatic shift in Texas politics. It was led by the Democrats at first. They got much more aggressive in trying to figure out how to navigate Texas's complex and very unique laws on voter registration that made them have to register voters in all these different counties separately. It's very complicated. Be sure to check out my story on that. You'll get a good lowdown.
Very complicated.
Absolutely.
Laws have made it almost so it I don't know if you know this, but if you're from out of state and you try to come to the state of Texas and register voters, that's illegal.
Yep, correct.
Not
You
allowed.
have to be a Texan.
You have to be a Texan.
And you have to, there's so many rules on it. And so that kept a lot of people from registering. Democrats started figuring out how to take care of that. They got more aggressive. They put a lot of money in it, both national groups and people on the ground. And so what you start seeing happen in 2014 is this steady rise in voter registration. As you can see behind me on this screen, it starts to really balloon. If you go back just to the 2016 election to now, we added 3.5 million voters. That is the equivalent of everybody from Wisconsin who's on the voter rolls moving to Texas. So not only were these candidates trying to win Texas, they were trying to win Wisconsin as well. That creates, just that surge of voters creates an absolutely wild card in Texas elections statewide, where we don't know how people are going to respond. And so that's why when we came out of 2018, we think, oh, Texas is closer than we expected. Yeah. And so people went into this going, okay, well, we'll get closer then. It's like, well, it didn't. It's like another surprise, because it's really hard to track new voters. Those are the hardest people to track in politics. You know this.
Absolutely.
A first-time voter, you have to figure out, well, are they ever even going to make it to the polls?
Yes.
Where are they from? Who are they?
Yeah.
And that goes to that other piece I wanted to get to. It's like, well, the Democrats had that surge. They had a lot of optimism. The Republicans countered. They started figuring out that they needed to do something too. Very smart people in the Republican Party created a better voter registration system where they could track incoming people. I wrote about it in that story about how they used advanced analytics to track people who are coming from Dayton, Ohio, or Boston, Massachusetts, and trying to figure out how did they vote there, what are their tendencies, and can we get them on our side?
Right. And also, when you're registering young people, like young people are very transient. They move around. They move from parents' house to a college town to a new job. So, keeping and ensuring that these folks are actually going to vote, that's a big question mark, right?
Yeah, and you hit on a key point there. And so those new registrations, what have they done to Texas, and to the electorate? It's made our electorate younger. It's made our electorate more diverse and more urban. You think of where all that growth is happening. It's happening in Harris County, which is our biggest, population center, obviously, with Houston. And then it happens along what I call the blue spine. Texas is a red state, but we have this blue spine running through the middle of us. It goes from Laredo all the way up to Dallas, Fort Worth. And that's the area that's picked up so many new registered voters and shifted the politics. You folks in Hayes County, up in Collin County, I don't have to tell you how it's changed the ground there. Yeah. Those are places that were Republican that have switched over. Even down here in Bexar County, you've seen it get pronounced blue in that time period.
Well, and actually Bexar County, our commissioner's court actually dropped $400,000 on a voter registration program here right before the election in hopes to kind of get these numbers up. And, we kind of did a preliminary analysis, and we don't have all the numbers in and everything in yet, but I kind of got a sense that these new voters that got added to the rolls here in Bexar County right in those last few months really didn't come out at the numbers that we thought they would. So,
well, and then that's where the surprise is. Even the experts in politics were like, okay, what is about to happen here? We weren't sure. We knew the Ted Cruz people were nervous and scared. They were, if you saw Ted Cruz on Fox News, like almost every night he was on the Hannity show saying, please send me donations. And he would say it 2 or 3 times. Like he knew he was in a fight. He looked concerned. The Democrats, how excited were they? They ended up getting Kamala Harris coming to Houston with Beyonce, thinking that, okay, this is like, they had Willie Nelson come out, they had Jessica Alba, they brought everybody into the thing. And so but the signal that sent to everybody was like, oh, it must be close. They must have a chance.
But the polls were showing that it was close.
Yeah, exactly.
The polls were showing, at least, full disclosure, I'm a product, or I have a relationship with Emerson College Polling. And Emerson College Polling in that last month leading up to the election was showing that independent voters were actually, men were voting, were were breaking towards Trump and then breaking towards Allred.
Yep.
So that was kind of like, and I think you saw Cruz sort of like, uh-oh, and he started stepping up his game. And I saw a couple of mailers that I was like shocked. Like it was like he was sending, it wasn't from his campaign, full disclosure. It was actually the Republican Party of Texas sent out this mailer like of reparations. It was like, reminder, Allred's black. Like it was just like incredible that they were, using these kinds of tactics to try to make sure that folks were going to come out and support Cruz.
Yeah, exactly. And the last thing the Republican Party wanted to see is anything happen to Ted Cruz. Because if Ted Cruz goes down, that's when you get that conversation of people saying, oh, Texas is blue, right?
Right.
Well, okay, so
once Texas goes blue, and this is important, because when Texas goes blue, the blue wall is insignificant. It is completely insignificant. So that's why Texas is so important and why we saw like starting to see some investments. And I've always been like, if we could just turn Texas blue. And back when I first started in my academic career, I kept talking about, oh, in 2024, 2020. Now it seems like it's going to be a lot further out, but not by happenstance, totally by design, because Republicans are making it more difficult, not just to register to vote, but to vote. So
yeah, and if y'all follow me on social media, you probably saw I had videos when AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, came through Texas, last month, and she actually did campaign stops in places like San Marcos and in Austin and in San Antonio. But it was those other two places where she made these big speeches, and one of the points was just that. It's like when we turn Texas blue, when we do it, of course.
Yeah.
There's another shoe to drop. Like the Republicans grabbed hold of that.
The Valley. Let's not talk about the Valley.
And they use that to,
let's not talk about the borders county.
Fire their people up as well. So let's get into what happened on election day that kind of threw a wrench into everything.
Quite.
Yeah. So first I want to talk about
like a sledgehammer, not really a wrench. It was this gigantic crash.
Yeah, and I think the one thing we can show, like even in Cruz, we've talked about this before. Y'all have followed me elsewhere talking about how Ted Cruz's numbers with independents were really bad, and that was a concern going into this, that those people would break the other way, whether they broke, back to Cruz, or if some people didn't show up on the Democratic Party. That's what we're going to sort out today.
Yeah, right? Yeah. It looks like overall Democratic turnout was low. Down. Certainly in Bexar County, it was for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things and when I was looking at the results, I was first. Let me start with Harris County. Harris County, y'all have seen this shifting on the ground. Like, Bexar County and Harris County both have one similar thing that's been happening since 2014. They've both gotten bluer and bluer. This is the place where Greg Abbott, Ted Cruz, and John Cornyn would typically win these two counties. They were doing fine, up until 2014. Things changed in 2018 dramatically, and that's why they started getting worried about these places. Harris County was a big problem. For Ted Cruz in 2018, he ended up losing Harris County by 200,000 votes. That was a huge number. Remember, this is a county that had voted for a Republican for president for 36 consecutive years.
Wow.
And Cruz comes around and they go 200,000 votes for the other guy. Yeah. This time around, that fell to 172,000. He still lost it.
Yeah.
But you can see they've lost a bunch of people there. And one of the problems was the actual turnout. People disappeared. I tracked over 100,000 people who voted for Joe Biden did not come out and vote for Kamala Harris. We went from Joe Biden getting 918,000 Democratic votes out of Harris County, and that fell to 803,000.
And the question was like, why is this happening, right? Like, why did this happen? Why was it because she was a female? What was it because she was a woman of color? What was leading all of this? And so a lot of us consultants and friends and people trying to unravel this stuff think, well, maybe 2020 was actually the anomaly, right? Because what were we? We were in a pandemic. We were all stuck at home in front of our screens 24/7, and all we were seeing is probably election messages. We weren't going to baseball games. We weren't doing our kids' soccer games or anything like that. We were really stuck at home, and maybe there was something that kind of created an awakening, perhaps. We also had more days to vote, too. I don't think that's a coincidence, right? We had an extended early vote period, which meant you gave people more time to vote, which, again, if you create a system that allows people to vote, perhaps they'll go to vote. We saw it shrink this time because we didn't have the pandemic. We had the normal election dates, which is basically 2 weeks. I remember the days when we would have 2 Saturdays of early voting. Now we only have one.
Yep.
So I think all these systemic things, in addition to just a very short runway for Harris, to be honest, I think there's a lot of things contributing to perhaps why this was not a very high turnout election.
Yeah, I think you hit on a very key point because we saw it both in Harris and in Barrett County, where when you don't have as much time to run a campaign, you miss a lot, right? It's like, I know that sounds crazy, but newsflash, y'all can check my paper at home, but Texas is big. It's a really big place. And if you go back to 2020, 2020 is a really important presidential cycle. Up to that point, we were seeing Texas, get bluer and bluer, or not bluer, less red, we'll say.
Oh.
We went from a place where Mitt Romney won it by 16 percentage points, and then Trump won it by 9%. And then it dropped to 5.6%. So you're thinking the trend is going to continue, right?
Yeah.
It didn't happen this time. And some of that, is because that, voters were obviously like got a new candidate at the end. They didn't invest as much in Texas. Remember, in 2020, Kamala Harris campaigned in Texas just a few weeks during that early voting period. She was down in McAllen. I was with her there. And the administration at that point, or the would-be new administration, was touting that, look, see, we're not taking the Valley for granted. We're sending our people to Texas, making a statement here.
Jeremy, breaking news. Boop, 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 boop. Breaking news. Senate Republicans, they've just elected John Thune.
We'll get into this. This is a big deal, y'all.
My iPad here. Yeah, so we do have a new majority leader.
Well, and I have a lot.
Totally derailed you, but he was like, if there's breaking news, let me know. So
I have a lot to say on this. If you've been following the Texas takes, we have a lot to unpack with this. So this is a perfect segue. So we know what happened, right? We know that the campaigns just didn't have enough time. And one of the things I want to really kind of stress with both the All Red campaign and with the Kamala Harris campaign, and this is a case I've been making everywhere I go. In politics, hatred and concern about the other side will drive out voters. There's no doubt about it. But you also have to have love. It's love and hate in an election cycle. And what I mean by that is you have to get some sort of energy. You think about Barack Obama's, campaign. When he ran, people were just passionate, behind him. Trump has that. As much as people were voting against the Kamala Harris, Joe Biden concept, he has the people who just love him, who are going to come out no matter what. And even in the Senate races, we've seen that with Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke was not just we want to get rid of Cruz, but people loved Beto and we're going to vote for him no matter what. You see it in both parties. When you can get both those things together, that's when the magic really happens. And the Democrats really needed that because of the shortened window for Kamala Harris and because of Colin Allred, his campaign style. It took him a while to get out there in some of these places and start building that up. He certainly made the case of why you should stop, Ted Cruz. But and even Kamala Harris, I think, made a great case as to why we should turn the page. Remember the debate? She kept saying we need to turn the page. I think she made those cases, but both her and Allred didn't have enough runway to build that kind of passion that normally a longer primary season would have given Kamala Harris or whoever the nominee would have been. And I think that was missing.
I would call that hope and optimism, right? Like they didn't have a chance. Love, but definitely hope and optimism. And I think that there was definitely something about Trump, who I like to affectionately refer to as the apostle of hate, because I think he was preaching hate, and that was really the core message of what he was doing, right? He was really leaning into the otherness when it came to migrants. And that was a huge, I think that's part, like when I'm thinking about this election, it's like to me, we want to find that one answer. Like, why did this happen? What's that one thing? And I don't think it's one thing. I think it's like an onion. It's like an onion where there's so many layers of things happening. So you have the immigration issue where we were just being hammered with that. We had the sort of the positioning Kamala way to the left on trans issues. We have the reproductive freedom on the ballot as well. So it's just like there's all these things happening, and I don't think there's one answer. And we're gonna and we still don't have all the data. Like I really, really want to stress that, because right now this narrative, and I've spent most of my career studying Latino politics and what it means to be a Latino in the United States and Texas. And, these exit polls are like, oh, he got 55% of the Latino vote. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Hold your horses. Like, this is, hang on. These are just exit polls. And exit polls are notorious for getting the Latino vote wrong. And they have. And in fact, I remember one of the narratives that we continued to hear that was false was that George W. Bush got 44% of the Latino vote, according to the exit polls. Well, Matt Barreto and some other academics came back, did a huge study. Turned out, well, it was only 36. But that narrative was set. And you even see, I read it in Sunday's paper in Rubin's column. He said, George W. Bush got 44. And I screamed at my iPad, no, he didn't. He got 36. Because I think we're all screaming into our iPads these days. But, so I just wanted to really be careful, because once these narratives are set, it's really hard to undo them.
Yeah.
So this narrative that he got 55% of the Latino vote, it goes into this narrative that somehow Latinos are now turning to the Republican Party and that they are the next Republicans of the future. And the reality is, and I say, if only Latinos had voted in this election, no whites, no blacks, no Asians, no nobody, just Latinos, Kamala Harris would be the president. So let's just be clear about that.
Well, and it's really important to point out that, I think the way this campaign, it's so different from the past cycle. It's hard to compare it one cycle to the next sometimes, because remember where we were in 2018. In 2018, there were so many competitive races in Texas, not just, for the U.S. Senate race. But remember, that was the year, we had, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick had a, pretty good race going on in his hands as he was battling, Mike Collier. You had Ken Paxton on the ballot. It's like you had a lot of races outside of just the Senate race,
right.
And then you had all these congressional races. This is a really big important point. When I look at Harris County, why there was why did 100,000 people kind of disappear, right? Why didn't they come to vote? Because both in 2018 and 2020, we had so many congressional races going on. You think of people like, Lizzie Fletcher, now a congresswoman. You think about the Dan Crenshaw race in District 2 in Houston, the Troy Nails race. Those races were expensive. They were on TV a lot. You couldn't help but feel that there was an election going on. Even here in Bexar County, the one of my favorite flipping seats in the history of Texas is what is now the seat that Tony Gonzalez holds that used to be Will Hurd's district. But that thing was always a nail biter. And in fact, during the entire time, Will Hurd, who's a fellow John Marshall High School grad, by the way, just a quick plug for my old friends. But the entire time he was there, he never was able to get 50% of the vote in any election. In the general election, because of how competitive that was. But this time around, that wasn't going on either. So as voters, you didn't have the other additional
we call that
push.
Pushing up, right? So you see these races pushing up. And actually, it's interesting because in the Steve Allison race, the 121, where Steve Allison has always actually outperformed Abbott in that district. So the presumption is that, Steve Allison was a great Republican candidate because he was pushing out voters, pushing up folks to come up and vote. So it's very interesting to see the way voters act, and we call them undervotes. So if you're looking to see at what point do they drop off the ballot, right? So they may skip a race, or they just may stop at a certain point and move on. So we call that undervoting. And one of the things you talk about the differences from 2018. I believe 2018, I might be wrong, but it was right around that point when straight ticket voting.
Correct.
That was the last time we did straight ticket voting. So we used to be able to walk into the ballot booth and say, I want to vote for all the Republicans or all the Democrats, pull one lever, one and done, you're done, right? And that the Republicans did away with that. And so now you actually have to go through the ballot, and people just get tired, and you're not able to. So some of these lower judicial races that typically would have relied on that one lever aren't getting those votes anymore.
Well, to your point, in Harris County, that's what we saw. It's like you talk to the Republicans there, they're super excited because, look, they lost the county in the presidential race again, but they were able to pick up some judicial seats, which they had been shut out mostly over the last, 4 years when straight ticket voting had been in place previously. They were starting to get their heads beat in every election cycle. But I know Paul Betancourt, the state senator from Harris County or from Houston, who kind of helped get rid of that straight ticket. This this was one of the reasons they kind of went after
Oh,
this,
yeah.
to
And
make sure they could
yeah.
get, they could break off the top of the ticket for Democrats in big urban areas. So maybe they had a shot further down the ballot. And in Harris County, it proved the case. I'm not sure if Bexar County, saw down ticket losses.
Yeah, we did. Actually, four of the fourth Court of Appeal judges here in
There you
Bexar
go.
County lost. Yeah. Now they won Bexar County, but they lost those rural counties, because the fourth Court of Appeal is actually 32 counties. It's a lot of counties. So you really have to win Bexar County by a huge margin. You have to be up plus 10, 12 points in order to make up the difference, which is all these little rural counties. And the Bexar County just didn't get them over the top. So now the fourth court is got a lot of Republicans on it now.
Yeah, and this is the point of the program where I will want to offer a little condolences to all the Democrats out there. Just look, I know y'all are feeling down, but here, like, if I was going to give you one piece of advice to like why you should, still have a little bit of a hope here in the state of Texas, one, not only is it just one cycle, and I'm always of the mindset of one event does not create a sample size that's ready to go, right? Like you need multiple events to happen, like multiple elections to kind of see a trend really form. But one thing that like still held, even though it was a Republican cycle, we can agree to that, right? Republicans had their year.
It was a Republican wave.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
just think that you can't, as much as I am pushing back on some of these exit polls, the trends nationally, you're seeing that there definitely was.
Yeah, Republicans have a lot of reasons to be happy here, but a couple of things still remain true. Going back to what we were talking about with the voter registrations, the structure of Texas has shifted so much because of our population, our growth in voter registration, and our younger urbanizing population that, even with everything being a Republican year, Ted Cruz lost that blue spine I was talking about. It's like, and that's a big deal. Like, that was an area that always voted Republican, but he lost it by 230,000 votes along that stretch. That is, like something that used to not happen in Texas. You have to go back to Ann Richards, the last time a Democrat had won it, prior to, Beto O'Rourke coming around and being able to pick it off. But so he still lost the blue spine, even in a Republican cycle. Same thing with Harris County. Harris County, I keep telling, I think Bexar County almost fits this too. These were unreliable Democratic cities. Even when most of urban America was voting Democratic, Bexar County and Harris County were like, we're going to vote Bush. We're going to vote, Mitt Romney. And like we were pretty Republican a lot of times in those election cycles. But I think in this cycle, even in a Republican cycle, Bexar County and Harris County said, we're not going back, right? They actually filled, that line at Kamala Harris.
We're not going back, but a lot fewer of them said
Correct.
we're not going back.
Fewer,
so like,
but still
so like in Bexar County alone, I think we had almost like 14,000 and some change less voters that came out this time than in 2020. So you definitely saw, again, COVID, more voting days, like there's a lot that can be contributed to it, but at the end of the day, less people came out to vote in 2024 here in Bexar County than had in the past. So
well, and here's your program, to remember, like if you have some questions, throw them into the Q&A. We're going to be about to get into all that here in a minute. I want to switch now to, talking about where we go from here, and, we already got the breaking news that Courtney will not be our majority leader, which would have been the first Texan to be a majority leader from Texas.
And I'm so glad we could count on Ted Cruz for his vote.
Since 1960, what was the last time we held this spot? And what happened when LBJ was holding that spot? He was able to get Mission Control moved to Houston and set up there. He actually created the Space Committee, in the U.S. Senate and made himself, as majority leader, the chairman of it, and made sure that we became the heart and soul of the space program. So you see how big that role can be.
And I was joking and said, that we could count on Ted Cruz because Cruz didn't support him. So thank you, Ted Cruz, for not supporting a Texan.
Well, and so, okay, look, and and both Cruz and Cornyn are going to have a lot of influence going forward here. Well, let's get into this a little bit. But so what does this Trump administration mean for people going forward here? But first, let's talk about, the one issue I think a lot of people are concerned about. I saw it when I was in the East End of Houston. I'm sure it's happening here in Bexar County as well. It's like, what does this mass deportation plan going to look like? If you've been following the news, one of the things that Donald Trump has said is that his first, priority on day one was going to be starting mass deportations. And that obviously sends a concern about like how you're going to do it, what's going to happen. Talk to me about like what you're hearing about what this feels like on the ground.
So But first, to all you Democrats out there, a little word of advice that Katie Harbeth gave me. Let's just panic responsibly, okay? Let's all panic responsibly because what's ahead is going to be some very scary stuff. There's going to be a lot of political theater. They're going to want to make it look like he's meeting this promise of doing the huge mass deportation. So what's going to happen is, and we've already seen it, there's going to be tent cities. There's going to be big tent cities, and they're going to start rounding people up, and they're going to go for the lower fruit first. So they're going to go for undocumented who have committed a crime. Then they're going to go to asylum seekers who have committed crimes. Then they're going to go, like, it's just going to, they're going to fill this up because they want the picture. He wants, remember, Trump is a master salesman, right? He gets shot in an ear, almost assassinated, manages to pull himself up and lift his fist in the air because he just, like, at that moment, if that had been me, I would have, like, been under the table, under the car, in the car, get me out of this. He had the wherewithal to lift his fist up in the air because he knew that that picture was gold. So they understand visual rhetoric and what that picture of deporting all these people, what that means to his base, right?
Yep.
What that means to him. Now, keep in mind, a lot of people are telling me, like, what happened in the valley? Like, or what happened along the border? Why did all these Hispanics along the border vote for Trump? Why did now what went from, I used to be like 14 to maybe like 12 to 2 in terms of like Democratic counties versus 2 Republican counties, and it totally switched to the opposite. So now it's like 12 counties are Republican and 2 are Democrat that went to Trump. And we're just trying to like unravel this. And the truth is, it's so funny because I have a writing group that I work with, and one of the members is Dr. David Montejano. And for those out there who know his work, he's amazing. And so he's like, what do you think happened, Laura? So I'm like, oh, I'm going through all these theories of, economic, cultural, religious, and typographies. And I've got these maps and yarn, and I've got this. And then he just looks at me, he just shakes his head, he laughs, he goes, Laura, immigration. And I was like, oh. And I thought for a moment, what is that? What's that? It's Occam's razor, right? Occam's razor,
Yep.
where you're like, it's all this. It's it's a herd of zebras coming, and it's not a herd of zebras. It's a herd of horses. Come on now, like what the obvious is. So I think immigration played a huge role in these border cities and border counties because what were they seeing and experiencing as small communities? Thousands of people coming in their communities, hanging out under bridges. Like all of a sudden, when you draw, like we saw it here in Bexar County.
Yeah.
I would go down San Pedro Avenue where the immigrant center was, and you would see families, and it would just break my heart because I know they were coming here for a better place, for a better life. But and these were not your typical immigrants that we were used to seeing, right? Like Mexican Americans. Now you had Venezolanos, you had people from South Africa, you had people from all these countries. And it was just this whole, and cities were overrun. And as much as I hate to say it, the Biden administration didn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And Abbott did. Abbott took some buses and started busing people out. And I think there was something about them doing something and Trump saying that he was going to deport all these people. And again, if you're living in Laredo, Texas, and you are a Mexican American and you've lived there your whole life and you've got your business and you're like a law-abiding citizen, you're like, well, he's going to deport all those immigrants who are breaking the law. That's not me, right? That's not me. So it's hard for us. It's hard for me intellectually to understand because I realize that there's not a conscious collection of understanding of us being a community as Latinos, right? Like,
Yep.
We don't have a shared destiny with all these Latinos coming in because those Latinos don't look like me. They're not me.
That's a very important point. You made a couple of really great points on this because I think I spent a lot. If you follow my stuff, I've been on the border a lot, and not just in one spot. I've spent a lot of time from Brownsville all the way to El Paso, being in different communities, and I think you hit on a really key point. There's an expectation that border crossings are going to happen in places, in a lot of places. You're used to it, especially if you're in the RGV, the Rio Grande Valley. It's kind of part of the life, right? That's where it's going to happen. But I think what happened these last last 4 years was very different in a couple of big ways. Hopefully people have seen my reporting on this, but when we started seeing Eagle Pass and Del Rio become these major centers for massive amounts of people, typically the RGV was the highest, crossing area of the state of Texas. That shifted at one point where it was actually poor Eagle Pass, which doesn't have the resources,
And
doesn't have the
help, and they're like, help us.
yeah, exactly. They were overwhelmed. So even people in that community who are generally like open-minded to helping migrants and they want people to get care for, even those people's patiences were being taken to the limit. All my trips to Eagle Pass, you could just feel that it became different when all of a sudden it became, a few hundred people like they used to get becoming 10,000, 40,000. It's like, and it's like you mentioned, from all over the place. It was no longer, it's not like in the 1980s and the 1990s where like you might see, men coming over to come work and that was it, right? But now you're getting people like from Venezuela who are asylum seekers fleeing a socialist government that they're, feeling for their life.
Whole families.
Exactly. And that created a different dynamic, I think. And so I think that's a really key point to talk about. But I also want to kind of address one point on this. The one I had in my Texas Tech newsletter yesterday, if y'all saw it, Tom Homan had been on CBS, 60 Minutes on CBS, talking about what this wasn't going to be. And I don't know if this will appease people. Tom Homan is the person that Trump picked to be his Homeland Security guy. He is a rah deportation guy. He definitely wants to get as many people out there. He went to the Republican National Convention and bragged that's what they were going to do. And they said, legal immigrants, you have nothing to be worried about. Illegal immigrants, I'm coming for you. It's like you can almost feel like a showmanship going back to the Trump ability to kind of understand a moment and kind of seize on it. Homan has some of those same bones in him without the Apprentice show, right? But it was one thing he did say. He's, and I'm, this is where we as media are going to try to hold the administration accountable for this. But he said there's not going to be mass sweeps of neighborhoods. It's not going to be building concentration camps. It's like, and those are really important things. This could become a linguistics issue, right? They say they're not going to do concentration camps.
Concentration.
Yeah, they're not saying concentration camps.
City, not a country.
It might be a tent city.
Yeah.
And NBC News just reported on like how they're looking for land in places to create detention centers. Yeah, very different.
Absolutely.
So now the question is, how do they play this out? And one of the things that Ted Cruz told me on the campaign trail when I asked him about this topic, he said, look, the first thing we got to do is go after the people who have committed crimes. That's what we're going at. We're going after the violent criminals first. We're going after people who have rape convictions in their life, people who have been arrested for...
Define crime. Did you run a stop sign? Did you get a parking ticket? Oh, that's a crime. So, I think that line starts to get really gray when all of a sudden they're looking to like add the numbers, right? All these asylum seekers who've been out there who may have, they're staying with other families. They don't have work visas. So they're out there, I don't know, doing what, they know where they live.
Yep.
And when they say there's not going to be raids, I seriously doubt it. Like the raids are part of the picture. That's what they're going to want to create. And Steve Miller talks about, and many people, if you're Latino, you know who Stephen Miller is. He's talked about that the true end of Project 2025, its true goal is to actually do denaturalization. So they want to go eventually, in his mind, and I'm not saying this gentleman is necessarily saying that, but Steve Miller definitely is, and he's said it and continue to say that he's wanting to denaturalize people. So again, so folks who've been in this country, who've never even been to Mexico, frankly, like since they were children, they've been natural. My dad's 86 years old, and he's, we traveled to Mexico back and forth when I was a child, but he's been in this country since he was 18 years old. Like, I seriously doubt that he would be, but Dad, did you pay your parking ticket, Dad? Let's just all make sure that our parking ticket, but in all seriousness, if you have a family member who has owns property or has assets of some kind, whose status they may have gotten a DWI, for instance, or something, like you really need to start making plans to figure out how to get those assets in other people's names, because I think there is a real threat that these folks will be deported.
Yeah, and combine it, and not to add to the fear up, but there,
Yeah.
there is concern that, because remember, the Texas legislature has been working on giving police and law enforcement new powers to be able to stop people for immigration issues. That's typically something the state wouldn't do. That was
Right.
typically a federal issue. But what the state has now done is empower, like, even local sheriffs to be able to, say, hey, I think you might be here illegally, and now I'm going to begin to get you deported.
Right.
It's like, and so that's created that level on top of what Trump is doing. So you can see why I think there's a legitimate concern of where does this go? It's like,
Right.
we've had a couple of questions on this, people wondering, like, what's going to happen to people in, like, construction industries and all kinds of service industries where you think of, like, think of the farm workers out there who we're begging for them to come and work in the fields, and yet we're also putting this threat over them at the same exact
Now I'm going to get all conspiracy theory on you, because I hate to do this kind of stuff, but these workers who come over have, low education, right? They're not educated. So they come here and they're, just looking for a job, right? So now we're going to kick all these workers out. Okay, well, how are we going to replace them? Well, little thing called defunding public education. Have you heard about it? So now let's create the next phase of the working class, right? And we've seen all these House bills now starting to get submitted into the House, right? Because they're getting ready for the ledge. And we're seeing House bills now. I saw one come across my feed yesterday that said they want to no longer provide public education for children who don't have immigration status.
Yep.
So you're essentially, and again, I'm getting all conspiracy theory here, and I'm sorry, but I do feel like this is all connected. I think what's going to happen is these raids they'll do this mass deportation because he's going to complete that promise, and he needs that picture and that visualization so that they continue. I guess in 2 years from now, when he becomes a real lame duck president, they'll all start eating each other to figure out who's going to be next, whether it's Vance or whomever. But I think there's just really, there at some point, business that rely on this workforce are going to say, whoa, whoa, whoa. We kind of need this. So then what's it going to be? A Bracero program, some kind of workforce program? What is it going to be? Or are they just going to open the borders back up, let people come through, shut them again? And is this just going to be like a performance thing that we're going to be doing for the next 20 years? Or are they really going to bring workers in a way that's respectful for them and what they bring to this country?
Yeah, and as dark as it could be, right? There's a potential that there are some cooler heads in the Republican Party, particularly, who can use this as a chance to talk about how do we fix the legal immigration system? Because look, that's broken. We know that. Everybody focuses on the illegal immigration system, but like the legal immigration system has all kinds of problems with it. And I want a shout out to Melinda Hall, who had a questions about, like, a lot of these, like, jobs that we're talking about. It's like, is this a chance potentially that Republicans will have, like, if Trump starts being able to do these deportations, will that allow them to negotiate on how can we help our home building industry, our agricultural industries, these people who are looking for workers and really rely on migrants to come here. Like, it used to be easier,
Right.
but now it's so complicated and everybody's kind of nervous, and that's going to be a key point to look. And I think, and added to it, I had another question here from Sally Matthews talking about what this means for DACA. It's like there's a big opening, right? These are the people who came to America as children, typically. They had no control over that decision, right? But they've been citizens, or they've been in the United States all that time and don't have legal status a lot of times. Of course, the DACA program was aiming to try to give them some sort of status, but clearly not full citizenship. And I think one of the important parts I'm kind of watching for on this, so it's like, I took some of the first appointments by Donald Trump as kind of maybe a potential signal. Marco Rubio was one of the people he appointed to. He's going to be the Department of State is what he's going to be leading, which is a big job for Marco Rubio. In my previous life, I was a reporter in Florida. I covered Marco Rubio in the early days of his, before he even got into the United States Senate, when he was still in the, Texas House or the Florida House of Representatives. And one of the things, he was a really big player on this. He thought he had a way to resolve some of these problems and take care of DACA recipients out there. He just felt like he got outplayed by President Obama at the time.
Yeah.
But that's a long way to say, I think there's a willing
Well,
negotiations with people within the Trump administration
yeah.
who might put up a going, look, if we do this, can't we provide some sort of protections for the people who have been here for
Well,
18, 20, 30 years?
Interestingly enough, when Trump first ran back in 2016, he met with the Dreamers. He met with Gabby Pacheco and a group of Dreamers, and he said, "I'm with you. I am with you." Then he got elected and he turned his back on them. So maybe like he said it before. Trump has said it before that he would support the Dreamers and he would support DACA. But then once he got elected, he turned his back. So, maybe he'll go back to that original position. What I really concerned about and the Dreamer community and the DACA students and many of the DACA are already they are doing jobs. They are working in hospitals. They're professionals, many of them. And many of them have never been, they don't even speak Spanish. You're going to send them, you're going to deport them to a country that they've never been to since they were small children. They don't even speak the language. I don't know how you do that, right? And I think we're going to see, if the Trump administration starts to do that, I think we're going to see the immigration marches of 2016 again, where we saw Latinos mobilize in a way that has never been done before. And it's actually what I wrote my dissertation on. These marches of 2016 was a show of Latino force that we had never seen, and we've never been able to recreate it because it was a clear and immediate danger that the Latino community felt. And once we see these mass deportations begin, and who do they start rounding up? Do they start separating families? Do we start hearing those god-awful recordings of children crying as their parents are being dragged away from them? How is that going to play in the narrative? Because this is a contest of narratives, right? Are they here illegally and a menace to society, or are they here as productive members of our society providing jobs and doing the things that American workers don't want to do? So it's going to be real interesting to see what happens. But those tent cities are coming, and it's going to be awful. Get your tissues out because it's going to be hard.
Well, and I got a couple other good questions here. One from Ann Weiner talking about the ACA and what we can look forward to with that. We know that there's a lot of pressure, from groups around Donald Trump to get rid of the ACA still. That's the Affordable Care Act, of course, Obamacare.
I love that you say that because this is true. On Twitter, there was a guy who's like, "I'm against Obamacare. I support 100% the ACA." And you're like, it's the same thing. And they're like, "Well, why do they call it two different things?" It's like, why don't you read? It literally is the same thing. And I actually have Obamacare. I am self-employed, so I use health.gov, and I just renewed my policy this last week because we have until the 15th of December. They have said, the Republican Party, the leader of the House, has said they want to do away with it. And they have this concept of a plan, but they better hurry up because we always say, if you take someone's right away, that's when people start to really stand. If they don't know what they're losing, many Americans know now what they're losing, which is having their 26-year-olds being able to be on their policies, their pre-existing conditions, so you still get coverage even though you have a pre-existing condition. So all these folks are going to be, millions of people are going to be kicked off of this. So what's going to happen? Well, they're still going to get sick. They're not going to not get sick. So they're going to start going to county hospitals. So then county hospitals are going to start having to, well, they're going to go to any hospital, really. Any hospital has to take them. So all those who do have insurance, now their rates are going to go up. And it's just going to be a complete, it's going to be a health crisis that's going to be beyond pale.
Well, the good news potentially for people who are using the ACA, there's so many states now that have expanded it, right? Expanded Medicaid. It's like we're over. The last count, I think when North Carolina did it, I think we were up to 42, 43, somewhere in there. So most states have done it. And so the one thing that and Trump has kind of alluded to this too, that okay, the ACA is not going away, but the concern will be he himself and the people around him have talked about the reforms of the system. And what does that mean? That's it. That's where Project 2025, if you've heard that, talked about. But and that leads me to a really important person who I think everybody in Texas who hasn't heard of her yet should get to know this name. It's Brooke Rollins.
I'm writing
Brooke
that down.
Rollins
Brooke
is she is the CEO and president of something called the America First Policy Institute. And she's originally from Texas. She's from a little town just in North Texas, and a Texas A&M grad. Worked for Rick Perry for a little bit, but she ran the Texas Public Policy Foundation when it was just a shadow of what it is today. And she really kind of developed and got the ear of Texas politicians particularly. And when she went to Washington, she worked with the Trump administration on their first round. And when that term ended, she created this America First Policy Institute with some really notable names in the Trump universe. And Trump started going to their events. They've created a whole list of program ideas that they have that they want Trump to sign. That makes I've said
You're
before.
feeling okay about this then?
Project 2025, I think I've been telling people is kind of a comic book compared to the seriousness of this one.
Yeah.
They haven't been as public about their efforts as 2025, but they have the ear of the Trump administration in other ways. Brooke Rollins was one of the finalists to be the White House chief of staff. He didn't pick her, but mark my words, you're going to hear a lot about how Brooke Rollins is going to have influence over this administration.
So I'm confused. So Brooke Collins bad? Are bad policy, good policy?
It's going to be very Texas centric. So and they are going to certainly want to do things to the ACA.
They're going to change it to do what?
We're not sure yet. It's going to be devil's going to be in the details.
Panic responsibly, everyone. Panic responsibly.
But remember, we'll still have Trump saying he wants to hold on to the ACA, but there's going to be major reforms, right? We'll see how that shakes out.
All right.
Which also, let's while we're at it, I had another question on Medicaid and other entitlements. This is something that you heard in the ads.
Right.
How many you heard Colin Allred use this against Ted Cruz, particularly that, look, if you elect Ted Cruz, he wants to privatize Social Security and Medicaid, be prepared.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't see anything on the forefront of that. Look, Project 2025 has it in their plan that they want to do stuff with that. And Brooke Rollins in this, foundation she has, they want to put a work requirement in for Medicaid recipients. That's different from Medicare, of course.
Yeah.
But so they have some things they want to do with that. But stay tuned on that because I think we're going to see a lot of discussion about that. But it felt like the Republicans tried to stay away from that because even in this day, they know it's still a third rail.
But they've already said publicly that they want to do away with the Department of Education.
True.
Okay. And the Department of Education funds a lot of these programs, the programs in public schools for children with disabilities. So I don't know, how is this all going to work out? Yes, I see we're safe, maybe. And I'm going to overshare here for a second. I'm going to overshare. The day after the election, my mom called me because my parents rely on Social Security. And she starts crying and she says, he's going to do away with Social Security. How am I going to live? And I'm like, don't worry, Mom, it'll be okay. He can't do that. There's no way. I'd have to hope and pray that the Republican Congress would not let him do that. I don't know. We don't know. But he has publicly said he's going to do away with the Department of Education. So we know that's going to affect our kids who have learning disabilities and have physical disabilities. And this is we're entering into dark times, I think.
Yeah, well, I think in Trump's case, we know, and you touched on this earlier, Trump says a lot of stuff that doesn't necessarily always come true, right? It's like he says he's going to build a wall and Mexico is going to pay for it. Yeah. And we obviously didn't get a full wall. Certainly Mexico didn't pay for any of it. But, so he says a lot of things, but what should be worth paying attention to, there's a lot of people around him, Tom Homan, one of them, who said, we almost did this last time and we didn't do it fast enough. You see, that's why the Trump administration is, the incoming Trump administration is being much more aggressive early on, and they're signaling that they're going to go after things quickly and fast. And one of the areas
he only has 2 years to do it, realistically.
Yeah, absolutely. And since we're in San Antonio particularly, it's we're a state with a lot of military. Let's talk about what that's going to look like for us as a state going forward here a little bit. I just kind of want to hit on this because Trump made his appointment for Pentagon to lead the Department of Defense. It's Peter Heges from Fox and Friends, who he's host, but he's also a veteran. He's an Army veteran.
20 years, I believe.
Yeah,
20 years.
but he's bringing him in it's a very unusual pick in a lot of ways, right? This is normally like 4-star generals and people who have long tenures in the leadership brass, but this fits to a bigger issue that Trump and the people around him have been making the case of that the military is not what it should be.
It's too woke, he said. And I was about to say something that was kind of ironic because it was he said a bunch of things on a podcast. Like he said he didn't want women to like be in combat. And then I was going to say, and then everyone says, well, don't hold him up to what he says on a podcast. It's like, oh, wait a minute, we're on a podcast here, so don't hold us to what we're saying. Okay, so but he said this on a podcast.
Yeah,
he said
absolutely.
some very like things that were like that would completely shake up our military.
Exactly. Where women fit in the combat chain of command, he has also, just like the people around Trump have been talking about DEI run amok in the military. They want to clamp down on that. Tommy Tuberville just he's the Alabama senator who used to be the Texas Tech coach before he left in the middle of a recruitment dinner. And so we're told. But anyhow, one of the things, he called the military an absolute disaster. And they are promising changes. And so the thing I'm going to be looking for, again, from a very San Antonio specific, approach, is this going to mean is this military reset? Does this mean we're going to cut spending? They've talked about thinning the ranks of the military, of the upper brass. They want to have a program to kind of look into who these generals are and try to see if they should be replaced or not. They're going to have a review process for them, which I think, again, anybody in the military chain of command, any veterans out there, look, maybe you don't agree with everything you're seeing from the military, but there's always that question of how much do you want civilians getting involved in making those decisions that are normally within the chain of command.
Yeah, this reminds me of the don't ask, don't tell, right? Like they're going to ask now. I mean, they're going to ask. That's pretty clear. That's what they're projecting. That's what they're telegraphing. They're going to ask.
Well, and so look forward, going ahead in Texas, what this is going to mean. Obviously Joaquin Castro, who represents, a big hunk of San Antonio, obviously, and right around the bases and, with Lackland and that. But also look what, Tony Gonzalez and Dan Crenshaw are going to be really interesting people in this, and Wesley Hunt. These are all military veterans who are Congress members, who are Republicans from Houston and San Antonio. They're going to be potentially a check on how far this goes. Maybe or not. It's like we've seen with Trump. He has an ability to get people to go places where they initially weren't. But there are some, there are definitely some veterans who are distinguished, veterans at that, who might have an ear in the administration. I look at a guy like Wesley Hunt. Wesley Hunt, if you haven't heard him, you got to check out some of the coverage I've had on him. He spoke at the National Convention. He's only in his first term in Congress, but one of the things that was interesting about him, Trump had him go to 15 different states during this election cycle campaigning for him, primarily in Black communities, trying to convince Black men to come vote for Donald Trump. And I think that access he had will be interesting going forward when military issues come up. I'm not sure if he'll get an appointment, obviously he's not going to be, the Department of Defense, but maybe because he was on Fox News enough. Again, it's a strange.
We too have a road to
absolutely.
government jobs.
And we're getting close on time here, so I just kind of want to also it's one more thing I want to definitely hit was oil and gas, right? What that means for the state of Texas going forward. Obviously, James Osborne, one of my colleagues out of our Austin bureau, or actually he's in our DC bureau, he ended up writing a piece on just kind of how drill baby drill back in line.
Back in line.
And where does this go with climate change, right? That's going to be the question. The one good news, there's not climate deniers necessarily around Trump. Trump himself recognizes that there is climate change going on. Just what can we do or should do about it is going to be the question. And watch Elon Musk. Elon Musk spent a lot of money to get into Trump's orbit. Does this mean that he is definitely a person who recognizes climate change and has talked about this before? He's in the electric car business. He wants that electric industry to keep growing. And again, we're Texas. We have a huge wind, energy sector that would be impacted if we start going back on some of that.
And we
So
saw Biden invest a lot of money in the Inflation Reduction Act, where we saw huge investments in renewable energy. So what's going to happen? Are they going to roll those back? Like how, and how does that affect Texas? Like,
Yeah.
it's a big deal.
Well, I know there's a lot of people wringing their hands like that. Republicans had the sweep here. The important point, I think, for people in Texas to know, even though it's Republicans and not Democrats in those positions, they're still going to have concerns about their state, right?
Yes,
like
absolutely.
You're looking at people in West Texas who have seen the wind and solar industries really kind of help farmers and ranch owners out there. They're not going to turn their back on those
because they want to be reelected.
Yeah, absolutely. They're going to want to get reelected. And so, and all politics is local ultimately,
Absolutely.
right? Like if you're not defending your local base, if you're not, protecting your oil and gas workers, where are you, right?
Wonderful, yeah.
Well, I can't thank all of y'all enough for joining us.
So much
for
fun.
this program. It's like obviously there's a lot to unpack. We're going to be talking a lot about this in the Texas Take newsletter going forward. Be sure to check out the Texas Take podcast. And Laura, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, on all this to help us break this down. Thanks again, y'all, for tuning in, and we'll see you at the next one.